In this video, we'll be hunting a box of nickels. We'll be looking for anything older than 1960, including war nickels or buffaloes. We'll also be looking for any foreigns, proofs, heirs or varieties, or any other cool things we can find. Let's start the hunt, and I'll bring you in when we have our first find. Roll 1, and we already have our first find, and it's one from the 40s. It's a 1941, minted in San Francisco. Roll 4, and we have another find. It's another one from the 40s. And this one is a 1947 from Denver. Next roll, and we have our first nickel from the 50s. And it's a 1958 out of Philly, which is a slightly better date. Roll 7, and we have another 1947, but this one's from Philly. Roll 11 had a couple finds that are right next to each other in the roll. First is a metal detecting find, 1941 from San Francisco. And then the other one is a 1957 from Denver. Next roll, we have another 1947 nickel, and this one's from Denver. Roll 13, and we have another 50s nickel. This one is from 1956, and it's out of Denver. Next roll, and we have another 50s nickel. This one is a 1954 Denver. Roll 16, and we have a pretty slick 1942. It's Philadelphia, and of course it's not silver. Next roll, we have another 1956 out of Denver. Roll 22, and we have another find from the 40s. This one is a 1948 from Philly. Roll 26, had a couple nickels from the 50s. First is another 1954 out of Denver, and next is a 1956 from Philly. Roll 29, had a couple 50s nickels. First is a 1952 out of San Francisco. The next is a 1958 from Denver. Roll 33 had a few 50s finds. First is a 1954 out of Denver. The next is another 1954. This one's from San Francisco. And then a 1959 minted in Philly. Roll 36, and we have a pretty nice 1952 out of Denver. Next roll, and we have our new oldest of the box, and it is a 1940 out of Philly. Roll 38, and we have another 50s find. This one is another 1956 Denver. Roll 41 had a couple more older Jeffersons. First is a 1948 minted in Denver, and the next is a 1959 out of Philly. Next roll, we have another 1959 nickel, but this one is out of Denver. Roll 44, another nickel from the 50s. This one is a 1954 Philly. Next roll, we have a pretty cool dark-toned 1959 out of Denver. Last roll for this box had a couple extra finds. First, in 1957 out of Denver, and the next is a 1958 out of Denver as well. That was all the finds for box number 1. I'm going to add another box onto this video since this box didn't really have anything good. Had 9 from the 40s and 20 from the 50s. No foreigns, no silvers or buffaloes, so hopefully there's some good finds in box number 2. Roll 1 of the second box is going to have a find, and it's a 1958 from Denver. Roll 3, and we have another nickel from the 50s. This one is a 1956 Denver. Roll 5, and we have the first 40s nickel of the second box. And it's a 1941 with a highlighted date, and it's out of San Francisco. Roll 8, and we're finally going to have the first foreign of the hunt. You usually get multiple foreigns a box, but the first box didn't have any. It's a Canadian nickel from 1999. Same rolls that foreign. Also had another 1956 Denver. Roll 10, and we have another 1958 out of Denver. Roll 12, and this box is doing great on 50s finds because we have another one. This one's a 1953 San Francisco. Just opened roll 13, and we're going to have another Canadian nickel. And this one is a 1989. Same roll, and we have another 50s nickel. And this one is a 1956 with some gunk on it, and it's from Denver. Roll number 16, another nickel from the 40s. It's a pretty beat up 1941 out of Philly. Roll 18, and we have our first nickel from 1946 of the hunt, and this one's from Philly. Roll 19 had a couple more 50s nickels. First is a pretty beat up 1954 Denver, and next is a very nice 1957 that's also from Denver. Roll 21, and this second box is going to have a good find. So I was just searching the roll, and out popped the Buffalo. It's going to have a date. It's from the 30s. It's a 1936 out of Philly. It's a very common year Buffalo, but any Buffalo is a great find, especially after that tough first box. Roll 23, another nickel from the 50s. This one's a super worn 1953 out of Philly. Roll 28 had a nickel from the 40s and from the 50s. The 40s is a 1940 out of San Francisco, and the 50s is a 1954 out of Denver. Roll 29, and we have another 1941 Philadelphia. Roll 31, and we're going to have another foreign, probably going to be Canadian, and it is, and it's from 1992. Same roll, and we have a find from the 40s. And this one is a 1946 out of Denver in decent shape. Roll 33, we have yet another 1958 Denver. Roll 38, we have a pretty beat up 1956 out of Philly. Roll 41, and we're going to have the fourth Canadian of the box. It's right here, and it's from 1982. Roll 48, and we have a 1959 minted in Denver. Both boxes have been hunted, so let's go over the finds. We ended up getting 32 S-mints, 4 foreigns, all were Canadian from 1982 through 1999, including a 1992 commemorative. Older Jeffersons, we did pretty well, pretty good amount. None from the 30s or no key or semi-key dates. We did get a couple nice ones like this 1957D. Then the find of the hunt was in box number 2, a 1936 Philadelphia Buffalo nickel. Overall, this is a pretty good 2-box hunt.